Welcome to the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast, powered by Jetro. Each week, we bring extremely valuable accounting and tax tips specific to small business owners. You will be on your way to growing your business and putting more money in your pockets. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is a Q&A session to close out our Starting a Business series. Now, before we get into that, this episode is brought to you by the Tax Minimization Program, which is a training program to ensure that you pay the least amount in taxes as legally possible while also having a solid bookkeeping foundation. You also have access to our team for general tax and accounting questions. It is like having an accountant in your back pocket with you on this entrepreneurial journey. Learn more at taxsavingspodcast.com/tax. I am your host, Mike Jesowshek. And again, today's topic is a Q&A section on our Starting a Business series. And really, this series stemmed from a conversation that I had earlier this year with a brand new business owner that was completely lost with no idea where to start. So if you missed any of our previous blog posts or podcast episodes, they are all on our website, taxsavingspodcast.com, or obviously you can look at previous episodes. We've had a total of 9 episodes so far in this series, and this is kind of the closeout to that. So the first episode was, what initial things should I consider when starting a new business? Number 2 was, should I stay a sole proprietor or organize an LLC or corporation? Number 3 was, how do I set up an LLC or corporation? Number 4 was, do I need to do bookkeeping for my business? Number 5 is, how do I hire employees in my business? Number 6 is, what do I need to know about taxes as a business owner? Number 7, how do I pay myself as a business owner? Number 8 is, what are estimated taxes and how do I pay them? And finally, number 9 is, what apps do I need as a new business owner? So if you missed any of those, go and check out our blog post, go and check out our previous podcast episodes and dive into those areas. Again, this series was meant as a starting point for anyone starting a business. Here is some general information that you're going to want to know out the bat. Now, throughout this series, we've had a lot of people reach out on our free Facebook group with questions, and many of those questions, it did not make sense to do a whole episode on, which is why we're having this kind of quick hit Q&A episode to run through some of those questions that maybe didn't mean for a full episode. Now, if you haven't joined our free Facebook group, go there right now, go to Facebook and type in Small Business Tax Secrets and join in the conversation with others. So, let's get to hit the Q&A section. Now, before we get into that, I just want to let you know, next week, we are having an incredible guest on our podcast. And this is an episode you are not going to want to miss. So be sure that you bookmark it and save it and leave us a review and do everything to make sure that you hear our guest next week, which will be kind of the official closeout to this series. Okay, let's hit the Q&A. Again, in no particular order. Question is, do I need a business bank account, and how does that work? And the question is, yes, you should always have a business bank account that is separate from your personal bank account. You'll hear us talk about that all the time. You're also going to need a credit card. If you do need a business credit card, you should have a separate card that's tied strictly to all business activities. So do you need a business bank account? Yes, you should always have a business bank account that is separate from your personal activity. Kind of a follow-up to that question is, how do I open a business bank account? Now, this is a really good question, and really you can work with any bank that offers business accounts. In order to open a business bank account, generally you're going to need your articles of incorporation from the state along with your EIN number. And if you're simply operating as a sole proprietor, the bank should be able to open an account for you on that as well. So you'll just kind of tell me that if you have a DBA, maybe bring in some paperwork for that. Or if it's Mike Jesowshek's accounting firm, we're just going to let them know that this is a sole proprietorship and provide any documentation if we have anything. We actually did a podcast episode a while back with a digital bank called Relay Financial. So if you would like an invite to them, contact us, ask at taxsavingspodcast.com or hit the contact page on our website. But if you'd like an introduction to a digital bank called Relay Financial, it's all online. Just let us know. Otherwise, there are tons and tons of options that I'm sure you know for banks out there, including local banks. Now, I always say that if you're looking for an easy connection to your bookkeeping software that we've talked about, say QuickBooks Online and Xero, usually the big name banks usually play well with that. They have really good online type systems. So thinking of Chase, Wells Fargo. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the biggest importance is having a separate business bank account. After that point, That's the kind of the first step. From there, where you decide to bank is going to be your personal choice. Just make sure you have that separate business bank account. And again, in order to open a business bank account, you're going to need articles of incorporation from the state along with your EIN number. That's if you have an actual entity structure. Next question is, there are so many ways to collect credit card payments. What is the best way to do this? And how do I get these direct to my bank account? Now, when we talk about credit card processing, it can get complicated, and it's usually because the companies that are out there make it hard to understand. When it comes to credit card processing, there's a few things that you need to think about. One, how much are you processing each month? What CRM or point of sale system do you use, if you have any? What industry are you in? Those are going to be some of the questions we need to decide, okay, what route or what company am I going to work with when it comes to credit card processing? Now, generally, we would tell clients that if you have less than $10,000 in monthly processing, you're probably just going to want to use an easy kind of one of those softwares out there that are pretty straightforward and easy to use, like a Stripe or Square or one of those. If you are having much larger amounts in credit card processing, let's say you're talking 50, 60, 70 plus thousand a month in processing, you're probably going to want to look into a more personalized solution. Now, I put that with an asterisk. I say just be careful out there. There are a lot of people doing some unethical things in this space, so just ensure that you're reaching out to the right people. Make sure that you can understand kind of the fees that you're getting involved in, because there's a lot of ways to hide fees when it comes to credit card processing. So just be careful. Get recommendations. Make sure you're working with people that you can know, like, and trust. Make sure you can understand their financial statements. As it relates to the second question, relating to getting the funds into your bank account, all merchant processors are going to ask for banking information so that they can deposit the funds there. Now, it is a big thing to note is that there's usually a slight delay from credit card processing until actual deposit. So if you process $10,000 on a Monday, you're not necessarily going to get $10,000 in your bank on Monday. There's going to be more than likely, some type of delay. So just keep that in mind as well. When it comes to credit card processing. The other thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to fill out a W-9 when you sign up for them. So they're going to send you a 1099-K at year end, which is actually going to report how much credit card processing that you did through them. That 1099 also goes to the IRS. So just know that you're going to have a reporting of that. Next question is, what is the best system to do my bookkeeping? Well, this one depends. Everyone out there has their own thoughts and opinions when it comes to bookkeeping software. The biggest thing that I can say is just ensuring that you simply have a bookkeeping system. As long as you have a bookkeeping system, that's the first biggest step. From there, it just comes down to preference. So, don't get hung up necessarily on what software to use as long as you're using a software. That's what I would want to say. I'd much rather see somebody using a software that maybe I'm not a big fan of than not doing anything at all. Now, when it comes to us, we use both internally and for our clients a software called Xero. It's spelled Xero. QuickBooks Online is, of course, a popular one that you have probably heard of as well. So I often compare these two software choices to like an Apple and an Android. Both are great software. Both service the same type of client and the same type of product. They are both roughly the same price, but it just comes down to preference. Some people like Android, some people like Apple. Nothing wrong with the other one, it's just their preference. Same thing with Xero and QuickBooks Online. Some people prefer Xero and QuickBooks Online. Both great software, they just have a preference. One of our preferences is Xero. Another free option out there that is all right for those that are just getting started and that plan to stay small is a software called Wave, waveapps.com. Of course, there's many others out there, but Xero and QuickBooks Online are the most common with, of course, our pick being Xero. For any of those that are looking to really grow this business, I'd recommend getting on a good accounting software. You can use some of these free ones out there. You can use Excel, especially if you're going to be small and stay small. Those are probably totally fine. But if you plan to grow your business, just go off on the right foot. The software is not that expensive out there for these small businesses. So just get started on the right foot so you don't have to worry about trying to transition that down the road. The next question is, what things do I need to know from the beginning to save on taxes at the end of the year? All right, so this question could be a very lengthy answer. The first thing that I would say is ensuring that you have the right entity set up. That's something that you're going to want to do at the beginning, and we talked about that at the beginning of our series. If you expect to have a decent profit, you maybe want to look into an S Corp, which means that from the beginning, you need to have an LLC or C Corp. So that would be one major thing to consider, I think, from the beginning, is thinking about if you plan to have if you plan on your business to grow and eventually be in a situation where you're going to want to do that S corporation, getting an LLC set up from the beginning is going to help make that process easier. Outside of that, we have a bunch of resources that are going to help for this. Obviously, listen to our podcast here. Shrinking your tax bill is the easiest way to put more money in your pocket each and every month. So those are the things that we talk about on this podcast. So continue to tune in here. We also have our ultimate list of business deductions. And basically that talks about, can I deduct this? Can I deduct that? We're going to kind of take the guesswork out and give you some ideas about possible business deductions. This is a free download. So go to taxsavingspodcast.com/deductions. And as well as join our tax minimization program. This is going to be our monthly program where we present all kinds of tax and accounting strategies available to you. You also have access to our team to ask general accounting or tax questions along with many other benefits. So those would be kind of the first next steps of saying, okay, where do I go from here? I'm starting a business. Listen to the podcast, download our list of business deductions, especially this series, listen to our series here, join our tax minimization program. Those would be kind of the recommendations I'd give to you. Question is, should I have a business credit card? And in that question, it's totally up to you. If you plan to have a credit card that you are using for your business, then yes, you should have a separate business credit card. So that's the key thing. We talked about that with the bank account. Same thing with a credit card. Now, with that being said, you don't necessarily need to have a credit card for your business. So that's going to be more of a personal preference. You don't need a credit card to operate a business. Now, if you do a lot of business spending, using a credit card can be very beneficial because you can earn points and cash back and things like that. But with that being said, I always say be careful too. I always recommend business owners pay off their full credit card balance each month. The last thing you want to do is rack up some large credit card bill that can really kind of eat at you for a long time to come. All right. So the next question is, if I set up a new entity, what do I need to do for the people paying me? Good question. You're just going to need to alert them of new banking information that you want payments to go to moving forward. They are also likely going to ask for an updated W-9 that includes your new company information along with your new EIN. So probably if you set up a new entity and there's people paying you, two things. Make sure you update them with their banking information, and they're probably going to need a W-9 that's filled out for your new entity. Here's a relatively easy question. What would I categorize checks that I bought as? And I'm assuming this question is kind of related to in the bookkeeping. So you bought checks for your business bank account. How do you categorize those? I would just record them as an office expense. Yep. When it comes to bookkeeping, and we talked about this in our bookkeeping series last year, but don't overthink some of these things. Get them in a category. We don't need to break it down. So we don't need a separate expense category for check expense or anything like that. We don't need to get that detailed with it, but we also don't want it to be like everything in miscellaneous or anything like that either. So just kind of be careful. Don't get too in depth, but also don't make it too simple either. So, all right, question is, if I just bought a truck for work, but I bought it personally, how do I get that into the business? Now, here's what we say. If it's going to be used mostly for business, we recommend that you put the vehicle in the business name. When doing this, we're going to capitalize it and put it on the books. If the vehicle is in your personal name, we will not capitalize the vehicle or put the loan on the books. Instead, you're going to use something called an accountable plan to reimburse yourself for the business use of the vehicle. So if you haven't checked out our accountable plan, we have an episode on that. We also have a link on our blog. All of these questions we're kind of outlining on our blog. So go to taxsavingspodcast.com/blog. You're going to see the Q&A section in there. There's a link to an article we did on an accountable plan where you can reimburse yourself for the business use of the vehicle. I definitely recommend that. But just remember, when you're buying vehicles, buying anything, if it's 100% business, work to get that done in the business name. If it's a business and personal mix, then that's when we're going to use an accountable plan to reimburse you. Kind of related to the vehicle thing here, how does business mileage work? Now, we did an article on this previously. Again, if you go to the article on our podcast website, taxsavingspodcast.com, I'm going to link out to that previous article we did. But this one is pretty straightforward. You get a certain amount of money per mile driven. And this would be for business mileage, like allowable business trips. This isn't just, you go to the grocery store for yourself. This is for business trips. And the mileage deduction rates for 2021 is for business activity, 56 cents per mile. Now, if you do charity or medical and moving type stuff, you can also get a deduction for that. So let's say you're participating in a charity and you're having to use your vehicle for that. You can get 14 cents per mile for business or for use of your vehicle for charity, as well as for medical. So that can count as medical expenses, and that's 16 cents per mile. Always remember personal or commuting. So obviously going to the grocery store for yourself, or if you don't have a home office and you're just going from your home to an office that you work in, that's a commute. That's not deductible. Now, we've talked about that if you have a home office, now when you go from a home office to another office or your home office to a client, that's no longer a commute because your commute turns into from your bed to your home office. So we always recommend business owners, you should always have a home office. But just remember, personal commuting miles, there's no deduction for that. Business miles in 2021 is 56 cents per mile, per business mile. And just a note for the business side, if you use your vehicle for business less than 50% of the time, you must use the mileage deduction. So just something to consider. Another one is, how does a DBA work for entity organization? Great question. So a DBA stands for doing business as, which means it's not an actual entity structure. You can also have a sole proprietorship, partnership, LLC, S Corp, C Corp, etc. that have a DBA. As an example, the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast here is a DBA to an actual LLC that we have. The real purpose of a DBA is that so your business can operate under a name different from your actual entity, but it's also important to know that a DBA is not a physical entity structure. It would have to be under a company or your name personally. So a DBA is not an entity structure. A DBA is just kind of a doing business as name that's reserved, but that DBA would be under an LLC or maybe just your name personally. So you'd be, if it was me, it'd be Mike Jesowshek, DBA, doing business as DBA, Small Business Tax Savings Podcast, or something like that as an example. Next question is, what is a registered agent? A registered agent is simply a person or entity that will accept official mail on behalf of the business. So your registered agent does not need to be an owner, but it can be. So just keep that in mind. A registered agent, and this is mostly when you go to register or organize an entity, there's a type of question that would pop up. So a registered agent is simply a person or entity that will accept official mail on behalf of the business. Again, the registered agent does not have to be an owner, but it can be in your specific state. Okay, so we have a bunch of more questions, but I want to push these off to an episode next week. So I don't want to kind of bombard you with all these questions in one single episode, so I'm going to stop the questions right here. We're going to extend the Q&A section on next week's podcast episode, and I know I talked about earlier in this podcast episode where we have that special guest. That special guest is actually going to be in 2 weeks. So this week is a first Q&A section. Next week we're going to do a second Q&A section, and then that in 2 weeks we're going to have that very special guest. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, if you have any more questions, pop them over, join our Facebook group, Small Business Tax Secrets in Facebook, shoot us an email. We'll kind of wrap up the Q&A section next week. Again, we just had so many questions that flowed through, and I didn't want to take up too much time going through all of them. So we'll finish up the Q&A section next week, and then the week after that, we have a very special guest that's going to kind of wrap up this entire Starting a Business series. So I want to thank you for listening to another episode, and I will see you guys next week.
This has been another episode of the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast from the team at Jetro. If you enjoy our weekly episodes, please leave a review on whatever platform you listen to us on and share with other business owners. If you have any questions or future topics you want to hear, email them to tax@jetrotax.com. Thanks for listening and have a great day.